Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Tracy Show. Apologies for getting started just a tad bit late, but I had a whole series of prompter issues going on. So, um, thank you for tuning in. My name is Tracy, and before I let my guest introduce himself, remember to subscribe to this channel. We are still needing 48 more subscribers before we hit 300. Don't know why it's taking so long, but subscribing literally costs you nothing. Remember to support us on Patreon. Patreon support starts between $2 a month and $35 a month. As you can tell, I need lighting because my lighting is terrible and I can't afford those lights and I need new equipment, which I also can't afford. Any money raised through Patreon actually goes to equipment, lighting, a microphone eventually. You might see an introduction someday. So just keep that in mind. And you can visit us on Facebook. Or if you can't remember that address, just go to Facebook.com and type in Tracy Media, all one word, and my picture will come up. So without ado, and remember to like this video, share this video, and comment in the comment sections because I do sometimes, most of the time, I will hit up candidates with questions that members of the audience ask. So I am going to let my guest introduce himself and we will go from there.
Well, hey, thanks for having me on, and thanks everyone for watching. My name's Andre Stackhouse. I'm a lifelong Washingtonian. I'm a political organizer, formerly from the tech industry, but I've been working on universal health care for about the last 6 years, especially as the executive director of Whole Washington, where I've run a couple of statewide ballot initiative campaigns for universal health care. But I'm on the show today because I'm running for governor of Washington. Ballots going out at the end of this week, due on August 6th. So check out the campaign, and I hope to win your support.
So you said the ballot is going out. Is this for the primary race?
Yeah, so this is for the primary. General election would be in November, but the ballots for the primary are due on August 6th. And since Washington State does almost all of its voting by mail, they start to send out about 18 days in advance. So you might not receive it all at the exact same time, but you will be able to turn in ballots starting either Friday or Monday, and the ballot boxes will remain open until August 6th.
Okay, so now I have a series of questions because now I'm a little tad confused, but I'll get there. So I thought you were running as a Green Party candidate. So
I
you
am running
are.
as a Green
Okay,
Party.
you are. Okay. So when I think primaries, I think just Democrat, Republican.
So in Washington State, we have an open primary. It's sometimes called a jungle primary. It's similar to California's system. So what we do is we run one primary, and all of the candidates appear on that ballot, regardless of what party they are. And then the top two candidates will go on to the general election. So if I'm able to finish in first or second place in this primary, then I'll be on the November ballot where the general election will be held. And that's the election where if I win, I'm going to Olympia to be Washington's next governor.
Got it. And well, let me backtrack this. Because I always start out with this question: why is it that you didn't run for a city council or mayor, and you just decided, you know what, I'm going to just run for governor?
Well, I would say that I have an ear for opportunity, right? I always want to have the work that I do have the most impact as possible. And there's a few things that influence this decision. The first is that I've worked on statewide policy, and as the executive director of Whole Washington, working on statewide universal health care, my work is known throughout the state of Washington. My knowledge about legislation as well as the tax code really applies most at the state level, and I would have a lot more. I would have a lot less credibility in many ways running for city council because I haven't done as much work at the city level. The other reason is that you have to look at who else is in the race. So, for governor of Washington, there are many candidates on the ballot, but there really isn't somebody that, in my opinion, was sufficiently representing the progressive cause. Um, and so by entering this race, I am able to give everyone in Washington the option to vote for that progressive candidate. Whereas at the city council level, in the districts that I would have been eligible to run, there are some strong progressives running. And so it would be a lot more, I think, difficult to make my case to voters running for a city council level position. So I think that while in the future there may be other races that I would consider, this isn't the only position I would consider running for. In this election, it seemed to me that it would give me the biggest platform to talk about the most issues, the most credibility.
And for those of you that don't know, um, Whole Washington, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is an organization that um, promotes, advocates for Medicare for all. They don't.
So
Am I somewhere within the right?
yeah, absolutely. So, Medicare for All is federal legislation, and whole Washington is very supportive of Medicare for All at the federal level. And we've held many, many events and phone calls and meetings with our federal legislators trying to get them to support Medicare for All. What we are better known for is advocating for a sort of statewide version of Medicare for All. So, the policy that we are known for is called the Washington Health Trust, and it is a state level implementation of single payer healthcare designed to match Medicare for all really as closely as possible. And then we have advocated for that policy both through the legislature, where it has been introduced as Senate Bill 5335, and as an initiative. So the last initiative was I 1471. So, in our opinion, we believe that this is achievable at state level. We believe that there are multiple paths that could make it a reality in Washington. And we are just trying to expand healthcare to be universal, as soon as possible for as many people as possible. And we think that we can achieve that in Washington State, and that would actually be one of the best ways to make this happen at the federal level. So, in a sort of similar way that you saw with cannabis, which is still not legal federally, but started in Washington and Colorado, and now is legal in many states, or marriage equality, which again, Washington and Colorado, two of the first states to legalize it, eventually becomes federally legal. And you have a similar story with healthcare. So in Canada, the first province to pass single payer was Saskatchewan, but eventually all of Canada had universal healthcare. So we're trying to follow a similar path where we lead by our example in Washington in order to see these things happen at the federal level.
Yep. And so I definitely thank you for talking about that because that's that's literally my number one issue. Like number one, without a doubt, we are the Affordable Care Act is garbage. But that's not what you're here to talk about. I'm here to talk about your run for governor. And you talked about that, but talk about some of the people that you're running against.
Yeah, so, you know, Washington State has had Jay Inslee as its governor for the last 12 years. He's actually the longest serving governor in the United States right now. And when he steps down, it's this huge political opportunity. It's an open seat that isn't usually open. And so there's about 30 candidates in the race. There is only one Green Party candidate in the race. That's me. I'm also the youngest candidate in the race at just 33 years old. Um, but the front runner, you could say, is arguably Bob Ferguson. Bob Ferguson has been the Attorney General for 12 years, and people have been aware that he planned to run for governor just as soon as Jay Inslee stepped down. So, in many ways, he has been the default, inevitable governor that everyone expected to be the next governor. Um, and so, as Attorney General of Washington, you can look at some of the cases he's taken on, and I think many of those cases have some, have merit to them. So there were many lawsuits against the Trump administration. And Ferguson is running as I think you would be fair to characterize him as a Washington liberal, a good Democrat. Um, so that's Bob Ferguson. Then the runner-ups to that front-runner spot, I would say, are all to his right. They're more moderate. So there are more moderate Democrats in the race, as well as Republicans. And so we have both a sort of more traditional Republican, although I wouldn't really call him that moderate, but there's more of a congressional Republican, and then there's more of a MAGA Republican. And so when it comes to second options, I really thought these are all unacceptable, right? So Bob Ferguson, there's a lot of momentum behind him as kind of a front runner and an obvious candidate for governor. But in my opinion, we needed a stronger alternative. And so I think that if we're going to have a top two primary, it ought to be somebody like Bob Ferguson and then a progressive rather than a liberal Democrat and a reactionary Republican of some variety.
Pardon me. I am so sorry. I don't know what happened to my throat. I'm just like, okay. So I always ask candidates this question, and feel free, everybody watching, to put your questions in the comment section. When you you already talked about what made you run for the office. But I imagine you hear this, and I talk about this on my Saturday show that I host. A vote for you would be a vote for somebody Republican. How do you answer that question?
Mm-hmm.
And why do we hear it so much? Because that's the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard, but I'm not going to get off on that tangent.
Well, it's a fantastic question, and I do hear it a lot, which is why if you go to my website, publicstackhouse.org/FAQ, it's one of the frequently asked questions that I have a pretty detailed answer to. But I think the first thing to establish is that it's absolutely ridiculous, especially in the case of Washington. So we are talking about, like I said, an open primary where the top two are going to go on to the general election. And there's really no way that a third place or fourth place candidate could somehow spoil this election for the Democrats. You'd have to pull the front runner down by 2 spots beneath, either 2 Republicans or 2 other Democrats, at which point you'd say, how is this even a spoiler situation? So Washington State's primary system, while it can be improved, and I think we need things like ranked choice voting, to make a better multi-party democracy in Washington, it is just absolutely not the case that a Green Party candidate or an independent or any third party could somehow spoil the election for the Republicans or the Democrats. It just doesn't work in our electoral system. You hear this a lot at the federal level, and that is because the Electoral College, frankly, is a very undemocratic system. And it's very fragile, and it can come down to incredibly tiny margins in a couple of states. And while this is our electoral system and everyone knows it and the consequences of it are obvious, when people lose under a system like this, it's very easy to deflect blame. And I think that that's something that I'm actually hoping to really push back against with my candidacy and say, we're all in this race to win votes and win the election. And it's really not my job to get votes for a different candidate. And so they got to win the election same as me under the same rules. And generally speaking, what you find is if you really look into the election laws and the election system, ballot access, campaign finance, consistently they favor the major parties, the Democratic and the Republican Party. If you really think that third parties are a spoiler, I really, really encourage you to run as one and find out how many barriers you're truly up against and how much less fair the system truly is for the alternative candidates. And frankly, it all serves to maintain a 2-party status quo that gives people very little voice in the system. And that has led us to where we are today. And so it's a huge part of why I'm running. running this specific campaign where I'm not running as a Democrat or a Republican, and running on all of the things that you're not going to get from the major parties.
That's such a good point. And I think it's so important because I live in Indiana, the Texas of the Midwest, and I hear it all the time. And you would think, oh, well, this is a red state. No way anybody's going to say that. Oh yeah, they say it all the time. We had some local candidates. We had some statewide candidates um, that we were trying to say, you should, because we often have to do write-in candidacies, which are nearly impossible. But we have so many petitions together that um, it becomes difficult. But I want to not argue your point, but I want to add to what you're saying. I hear so many times, and this is why I'm sponsoring on Thursday, August 29th. On a Thursday, I think that's going to be a forum called Destroy the Duopoly. We're going to have a intense, deep discussion about this because if I hear one more time that a vote for a Green Party candidate or a Libertarian candidate or Justice for All Party is a wasted vote, I'm going to scream. I'm just going to scream. How do you tell somebody because you don't vote R or D that's a wasted vote? I I don't get it.
I agree completely, and I think that one thing that I came to realize is that Washington so consistently votes blue, right? So we're not even a swing state where you can get a little bit more of that national attention. We vote blue so consistently and by such wide margins that we are very rarely even visited by, say, a presidential candidate, right? And so came to realize that I exercise more influence on the system by voting outside of that. Because if I just vote the same way everyone else does, the same winner that we always get, then I'm really not providing meaningful input into the system. But if instead I vote for something that clearly designates what I do want and does not simply give that vote to the incumbent party, the front runner, well, that is more meaningful.
Yep. And talk about, you said a word that's a little tricky that kind of has me thinking. Talk about what you had to do because, of course, I don't live in Washington State, so I don't know what the ballot. How did you get to be on the ballot in the first place?
Well, Washington State has pretty accessible ballot access. And so it's one of the many reasons I am grateful to live in Washington. And it's one of the reasons why I think that we actually have a pathway to creating a viable, politically influential, and represented in government Green Party in Washington. I think that this is achievable because our ballot access uh, is not too onerous. Now, what I had to do, I had to file online, and you basically have two options. One is you can petition for ballot access, and I think you need a couple thousand signatures, maybe between 1,200 and 2,000. Um, and that will get you free ballot access. The other option is you can pay, and depending on what position you're running for, the filing fee can be higher or lower. So in my case, I did pay the filing fee. It was just under $2,000. I think about 1850. Um, but I was a last minute candidate, and I was weighing my options and trying to assess support out there. And so one of my regrets is that because I filed, basically as late as you could file, my only option was to pay the fee. Um, and I would have preferred to get into the race soon enough to gather the signatures, because that, in addition to saving you the money, helps you build that movement out there on the streets. So I think that it's great that we have that option. At the same time, I think that you right out the gate see that anyone who can just drop $2,000 on ballot access has a big advantage over anyone who doesn't have that ability. And so I think that it's strange that we, gatekeep ballot access behind that kind of money. I think that, a filing fee is reasonable, but a filing fee that high is nothing but a barrier to entry.
I want to hear. Did you say 1,200 signatures?
I, I'm just estimating, and I think that it's close to what we had to do to get Jill Stein on the ballot. But yes, I know that in some
Okay.
states it's
How many
incredibly
people
high.
does the state of Washington have? Like, how
Yeah,
many
about
citizens?
7.7 million.
Okay, so we're about the same size. 37,983.
Oh yeah, and it's 45,000 in New York. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's oh my gosh. I don't this is not a destroy the duopoly discussion, but this really irritates me because like your candidacy and all the other third party candidate or let me backtrack, alternate party candidates have to be some kind of threat. Why would you come up with all these insane, idiotic rules? You pay a $20 filing fee, you're on the ballot, end of story.
That's what I want. That's what I
That's
want
the
for
easiest way. But
every state in this country.
no, they're not scared, and you're not throwing away a vote. Just make it hard. Just make it hard, and then say we have a democracy. Oh my gosh, I'm trying not to get angry, guys. I'm really trying not to. I'm really trying not to because this really frustrates me to the uttermost. You should not have to be now. Obviously, you're not getting your funding I hope, from like political, like dark money and political action campaigns. You're making yours more grassroots. Talk about the difficulty because I always talk about fundraising, right? This is probably the most difficult thing next to ballot access in a campaign.
It is. I mean, I think that fundraising, I think fundraising is a solvable problem. I think that you can build grassroots supports. You can build it off of small dollar donations. I would love to see more public campaign finance available. Um, but I would actually just say that it's possible that the media is the harder thing because you can raise money, but you can't tell the media what to
Oh yeah,
publish.
you're right. You're right
But
because if you never get on media, it's like, who is this person? I don't know this person.
Right. And so the fundraising, I think will never raise as much as the corporate candidates, but I have taken the no PAC money pledge. And I plan to take actually a couple more pledges, so keep an eye out. But in addition to not taking any corporate money for my campaign, one of the reasons I run with Green Party is because Green Party itself takes no corporate money. And so you can confidently donate to me, you can confidently donate to my political party and know that none of that's getting mixed in with corporate money. Um, but what that means is you tend to start from very humble beginnings. What you can raise yourself, what you can raise from your friends and family. And in my case, I'm able to come out the gate with, a few hundred to a couple $1,000s, which will buy you enough to get started. But I'm really fortunate, actually. So the Green Party of Washington has endorsed my campaign, and they are currently running a matching funds campaign. And so last I checked, there was about $500 left on that matching funds campaign. So if you go to publicstackhouse.org/donate, there's a link to that matching funds campaign. You can double your dollar, and when we raise that $500, it's going to double to $1,000. So that's like major money for a campaign like mine. In addition to that, I applied to a grant from Green Party National, the coordinated campaign committee, and was awarded $900, which I have not been sent yet, but that's incoming. So I do have some money coming my way. You can double your donation at publicstackhouse.org/donate. And that pays for really, really valuable visibility. Yesterday I had a bunch of people over and we were pressing buttons, we were printing quarter sheets, we were making posters and flyers. And we're going to hand those out on Saturday in the University District. But we're also sending out our first SMS campaign today, which I believe should be going out within the hour. And those add up really fast, but it's about I want to say 35 cents a message, maybe lower than that. So even a few dollars, that gets the word out to a lot of people. And so one of the biggest challenges that we really have to overcome as an alternative party is just the word of mouth, the knowledge that there's a meaningful difference on the ballot, not just, hey, there's a guy named Stackhouse, but there's a different kind of candidate on the ballot that's worth spending some time thinking about and voting for. So all of those donations help us get that word out. And, we're really building a movement. We're thinking long term. So this campaign, we're going to take it as far as we can take it. We're going to spread the word as far as we can spread it. But after the election day, we're getting right back to work, regardless of what the results are. So either I'm continuing this as governor, or I'm continuing this as Andre Stackhouse, the citizen activist who's worked for the last 6 years and is going to continue to do this work. So your donations really do matter. They really do help all of the issues that I'm running on become more known, more valued out there in the public.
I want to get back to a question I didn't ask when you were saying that your state has an open primary, because I don't like to say I don't know, but essentially I'm asking because I don't know. Um, when you when you run as an open primary and you don't get elected, are you then allowed to become a write-in candidate or no?
That is a good question, but I think the answer is no, because I think the general election ballot is top two. That's why it's a top two
Yeah,
primary.
because I didn't think so. So I'm like, well, okay, that makes sense. So you just get to pick, like November 5th. You're only going to have two picks, and that's it.
Hmm.
And you
Yeah, if
can't
you
just
want to
write
be a
in.
write-in candidate, I think your chance to do that is in the primary. So I was at a candidate reception, and one of the candidates there was a write-in candidate, but they only get that opportunity on the primary ballot, and unless they're able to get enough write-ins to be first or second place, they can't be in the general election.
Yeah, that's where I was like, oh yeah, because I thought, oh, that'd be a good idea, but no, that wouldn't be, because then there's a lot of problems with that. Um, Another issue, and I still haven't had a candidate that's done this yet. Debates. Have you participated in any debates? Have you been invited to any debates, or are you being excluded from debates?
So the only debate that I've heard of, and I wouldn't say that I've ever even watched a governor's debate in Washington. So like I said, Jay Inslee's been the governor for the last 12 years, and I don't think they've generally held debates. This year, I did hear about a debate. So the League of Women Voters, they're hosting a debate. They sent me the effectively an invitation, but I'm fairly certain if I read it correctly, the invitation is only going to apply if I make it past the primary. So they're basically holding the debate off until after the primary so that they can keep it to two people, and that's it. And I think that goes to show you exactly kind of the problem I'm talking about, right? By the time people get their general election ballots and they're really coming down to the real choice, the conversation's already basically over. You're down to two candidates, probably a Democrat and a Republican, and they'll hold a debate. But what's there really to debate, right? The debate would be much more interesting if they held it during the primary and got at least 5 to 7 candidates up there.
Or 8, 9, or 10?
Sure, yeah, I think you know they could hold multiple debates, and there really is no reason we couldn't hear from everybody.
Well, there's a reason. There's definitely a reason that it's set up that way, right? I mean, we know that, and this is again why I refuse to run for office, because I don't know how the candidates that appear on this show endure that, because
You
it's already stressful to run for office, because in most cases you got to be your own campaign manager, you got to get volunteers, sometimes volunteers drop off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have to deal with the media that doesn't want to give you any type of exposure. Then you have to be excluded from debates, and then hear, oh, we have this great democracy. I keep saying, show me where it's at, and then maybe I'll find it, because I haven't seen it yet.
and I think by by running, you get to expose a lot of that, and I think that is very much part of what moves me forward, right? Is that um, when it comes to the issues, I'm every bit as serious as any other candidate up there. I would argue more serious than any other candidate in the race. I'm the only candidate who's laying down real vision, comprehensive vision, serious solutions, universal programs that everyone will get to benefit from. And the fact that I'm not running as a Democrat or Republican, the fact that I don't have $10 million sitting in my campaign account, those are the reasons why I'm not treated as seriously as the other candidates. But those aren't good reasons. They're just not. And I think that by running, you at least get to demonstrate that publicly.
How let's see, I forgot my question. I just had it right there at the tip of my tongue, so I'll ask something else. So, besides universal health care, Medicare for all, because I'm still using that term, even though you say that's not what you call it in Washington, what other issues, I can guess what other issues there are in Washington because they're probably the same here. But what other issues are you focusing on, and how would your focus be different than your opponent's focus?
Well, what I would say is I think at the federal level, we've seen a sort of emergent progressive agenda that's gotten quite popular. And you think of things like a Green New Deal, college loan forgiveness, Medicare for all, right? These really big, trendy issues. And so, what I aim to do with this campaign was to really put forward a statewide level of a similar agenda. And so this is what it came out to. If you go to publicstackhouse.org/platform, you can see my entire policy platform. And I'm really running a policy driven campaign, which is to say, my platform is almost more the candidate than me myself. I'm the candidate who's on the ballot, but I'm not running vote for Andre. I'm running vote for the platform that's on my website. So the platform has a few different themes to it, but the one that I think is easiest for voters to connect to is the idea that we must address Washington's ever worsening affordability crisis. And this is something felt all over the country. Everything is expensive, but Washington is one of the most expensive places in the country. And so universal health care is the issue I worked on for 6 years, and I do still maintain that it is, if not the most important, at least one of the most important issues that should be first and foremost for any progressive trying to get things done out there. But housing is a really huge issue. It's, you see housing issues everywhere. Um, and so the next major plank of my affordability pitch is a housing guarantee. So between healthcare and housing, you kind of can address two of the deepest causes of poverty. So the number one cause of bankruptcy in Washington and the United States is medical bills. You go bankrupt, you lose your home, and then being homeless is incredibly bad for your health. So all of your medical bills go worse, all of your health issues get worse, and it makes it very difficult that you ever get back into a house. By saying you have a guarantee to healthcare and you have a guarantee to housing, we're going to keep a roof over your head, we're going to keep you in the best health as possible, and that is just going to prevent the worst impacts of poverty from happening. So housing and healthcare, incredibly important. The next is tuition free higher education. And I say higher education because I don't just mean college, I mean our universities as well as our community colleges and trade school. Um, and so this is very important for a number of reasons, but in a changing economy, in a world where, we have, global competition, we have artificial intelligence and things like this that change industries, it's really important that people are able to pursue an education and have that not be a source of financial hardship. They might need to do that for any number of reasons, right? They might need to do that because we've passed a Green New Deal, and this makes certain jobs like coal no longer viable. And we need to have humane pathways for people whose jobs are displaced to find their way into a new industry. So that's why we have tuition free higher education. And then the last is a living wage. And a living wage is different from a minimum wage because it's based on things like cost of living. It's adjusted annually for things like inflation. And in my version, I specified that this needs to include cost of things like utilities, like transportation. Um, and so in Seattle, this might be a very, very high wage, right? But in other parts of Washington, it could be lower. And it would change every year based on the economic conditions. And so, in this sense, it's more automated, it's more flexible. But the general premise is if you live and work in Washington, then you deserve to be able to afford all of the things that we need to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? That's things like an internet connection. Um, so those are kind of the 4 issues that I'm leading on. Now, I think there's about 17 issues on this platform, and some of them are small, some of them are big, some of them are more niche, some of them are very mainstream. I'll give a shout out for I've got a universal basic dividend and fair free public transit on there, but even smaller things like free school lunches. Um, all of these platforms or all of these policies are, in my opinion, visionary, and yet they're all 100% achievable and would just be good government, good economics, and more freedom for Washington State.
What do you say to people, and I often hear this as a statement against people who I would think would lean more towards the left side of politics than the right side? What do you say to people that say you want too much?
I think that given, that we live in the richest country in the world and we live in one of the richest states in this country, and we pay an incredible amount in taxes as well as an incredible amount in private spending all the time in things like, say, healthcare or for our car insurance. um, we like I said, this is one of the most expensive places to live, and I do not think we are asking for too much for how much we spend, how much we're asked to spend, how much we're asked to work. um, so all of these things are feasible. They have been done somewhere in the world or somewhere in the United States, and they're all things that make our life better, and they're things that prepare us for a better future. And so none of that is, in my opinion, too much. To me, the thing that's more insulting is the idea that we should have an inefficient government, that we should, you know, be forced into certain private industries that we might prefer to not be, like health insurance. We're forced to participate in predatory industries. Um, and there are people who just say that it's too much to simply say, I don't want to do that, right? I want to, I want my money to go towards public services. I want my money to go towards making my life better and making my community's life better. That is not asking for too much.
Another criticism, and I hear this one more from the people on the right, and I still say, please show me what democracy you're talking about. The programs, and I'm just saying this as though I'm them, you're leaning a little bit towards communism.
You can call it whatever you want. I would say, point to a communist country that really has all of these things. Um, I think that communism is a scare word, and it's often not understood by people who use it as a scare word. Um, but all of these things exist in many different kinds of countries. Some of them are social democracies, some of them lean a little farther into socialism, and many of them are just uh, they're just liberal, industrialized countries, very much like the United States in many, many ways. Um, what I would describe all of these as is public goods. They're public services. They're universal so that we don't spend nearly as much money having this means testing to say who gets this, who doesn't get this. I think it's ridiculous to spend money to keep people out of a public service. Um, and if that makes this communist, if that makes me a socialist or something like that, then I'm happy to own the label. Um, in my opinion, all of these things are simply expanding on um, things that we have in the United States right now. We have Medicare and Medicaid, and they're popular and they work well. They just should cover everybody, right? We have a public transit system, but fare makes it more regressively funded and slows it down, right? There are other ways to fund transit. Fare is not the best way to fund transit, but we already have public transit. Many of these things, people, they think of it, they get this idea that, oh, I just want free stuff, right? Well, when I go to the library, or let's say use a service like the fire department, right? Nobody hands me a bill when I'm done, right? The fire department doesn't roll by, out the fire in my house, and then send me a bill. And it's not because they all work for free. It's that it's already paid for. And so all I'm saying is that healthcare, college, all of these things, they should just be more like the fire department. We already have free K through 12 education. That wasn't always the case, but it is today. All I'm saying is let's extend that to include higher education, right? So I'm talking about expansions of popular and well liked, well respected public services.
Absolutely. Next question. Back when November 5th comes, and I always assume the candidate is going to win. So I'm just going to assume that you win on November the 5th. What does your first 2 months look like? What is it that you want to accomplish within those first 2 months after getting sworn in?
Well, that is, a very, very big question to answer, because the first 2 months are going to look like me drinking from a fire hose, trying to learn as much as possible, trying to understand all of the resources that I'll have available to me as governor. Um, but I think that the most important thing that a governor can focus on in the first 2 months are going to be broad vision and agenda setting, and saying, this is my administration. This is the Washington I'm trying to create. And this is how I'm planning to govern. And making that expectation very, very clear, so that the entire state apparatus can get behind it, or if they want to resist it, then we can have those conversations early and figure out, what the compromises are going to be, figure out what the strategy is going to be. Um, and then, of course, focusing on appointments. One of the greatest powers of the governor is to appoint people into agencies. And so I'll be running a very, very reaching search across the state of Washington for the best people to fill those roles. I would love for that to be a very open and competitive process with many, many fine people considered. And I would like to recruit uh, from sectors that are less common, academics, political organizers, people who are really doing the work on these things, and less from the sort of revolving door political class that, maybe is a little bit more career driven. I'm really looking for people who are with me on these issues and have been putting in the work. None of these issues come from me or come out of thin air. These are all things where people have been putting in the work for years to design these policies, to explain them out in the public, so that somebody like me can run for office and say, don't take my word for it. There's decades of research. There are people, there are leaders, right? And so those are the people I want to appoint into my government.
So now the reverse question. So we get to November 5th and you do not win. What is your 2 month plan after that?
Well, I think I might be taking a vacation. Just a little bit of time to decompress. Running for governor is stressy business. Uh, but big picture, I'm going to get right back out there. I mean, I remain the executive director of Whole Washington, and I have been busy, of course, but I'm still out there doing town halls for universal health care. Um, and I'm going to be trying to kick Whole Washington into the next gear. We are hoping to run our next statewide ballot initiative in 2025. Um, and so that is going to depend on us getting enough support by then to run that initiative. But if I'm not elected governor, then that's going to be where a large portion of my attention goes. But I'm also going to try to so my website, publicstackhouse.org, I'm going to keep all of the issue pages up on that. I'm going to keep the calls to action up there so that I can continue to build support for this platform, continue to spread awareness on these issues, continue to train people in the art of organizing. and bring them into my network. And we're going to keep moving these issues forward. I'm going to be building coalition and collaboration with the groups that I mentioned earlier, Washingtonians for Public Banking, other universal healthcare organizations. Um, and we're going to, sit down at that drawing board, make our strategies, plan our next plays, and keep these issues rolling forward. And what I'll say is one day, and it could be me, it could be somebody else, but one day Washington will elect a governor who is ready to back every single one of these policies. And one day we will have these things. And I'm just trying to push to make that as soon as possible because I want to sit back and live in this Washington. And I want to see it in my lifetime. So that is the mission, and I'm going to be working on that until we have it.
When you are campaigning, um, I'm assuming with the funds you have, your campaign is mostly door to door. I'm just assuming, and festivals and those type of things. When you're speaking to voters or potential voters, what is it, good or bad, that you're hearing? What is it that they're saying is a concern? And are they saying, maybe let whomever you said was the leading candidate, let him run and kind of push him more towards, because we hear that a lot too. It's like, oh, well, you should just push him to the left. Or what is it that you're exactly hearing?
Well, I would argue that I'm pushing him right now, but I think people in Washington, there are a lot of people who are inclined to like Bob Ferguson. They are people who have voted Democrat their entire life. They're people who are maybe happy with Jay Inslee as governor. And they see Bob Ferguson as the successor to Inslee, which he is. He absolutely is. He was part of Inslee's administration. They've held office for the exact same years, and he's running mostly on a continuation of a sort of Inslee Washington. I couldn't tell you a huge number of differences between the two, other than Ferguson, would argue that he's going to take some of these things farther and kind of continue from where Inslee left off. And to a lot of people, especially if you are well off, that probably sounds pretty nice. There ain't nothing wrong with what's been going, right? That's their opinion. I think that uh, some people look at me and they can tell that I don't have as much money backing the campaign, right? And they simply respond to that. So they're not really thinking about policy. They're not thinking about movement building or political change. They're responding more to, oh, this guy has a more professional poster. He has ads on TV, right? And that's really all it takes. And I think that that is a kind of political apathy that we need to kind of shake people out of. And so a large part of what I've had to campaign on, one, is that look, things ain't great for everyone. A lot of people are struggling. And however expensive you think things have gotten, there are people who just literally can't afford, all of the things that have gotten so expensive. But on top of that, when we look at our federal politics and we just see how unstable it is, right? And we see how fragile some of these things are. So Roe versus Wade as this thing that, we had for 40 years, and we were waiting for the Democratic Party to codify that into law for 40 years. And then one day you wake up and it's gone. And yes, we're lucky that in Washington state, the right to reproductive care was established before Roe v. Wade, and it exists here after Roe v. Wade. But my argument is that this is not a stable boat to be on. We need to expand our rights. We need to defend them, and we need to recognize that these are not graces given to us by the federal government. These are things that we have to fight for to establish for ourselves. So I think that if there's any good news about the sort of embarrassing federal politics situation, it's that it is waking people up to maybe, more of the same isn't good enough. Maybe that's what got us here. And we truly do need to consider different kinds of candidates, different kinds of politics in order to build a more stable Washington state and more stable world.
A question I didn't ask. I'm assuming there's going to be a lieutenant governor.
Hmm.
Is the person that wins the, I'll ask this in two-part question. One, is the person that wins the primary allowed to pick their running mate? Does the party that they, well, no, because you're a Green Party. So if you win the primary or you come in second place, are you allowed to then pick your own candidate? You are not.
So in Washington, the lieutenant governor is elected separately and is also up for
Oh,
election right now.
that's so different because ours, we do ours at our primaries. They'll just, they'll elect the governor, then they'll elect the lieutenant governor, and then those two just run on. They're just running mates.
Hmm.
So it's separate. So you could get someone, not to be Debbie the Downer, but you might get someone that's totally opposite of you.
That that certainly can happen. Yeah. I can't say I've thought or I'm aware of an example of that happening because Washington usually will elect two Democrats who I think, find a way to live together. But we have had Republican governors before, so like theoretically that could happen.
Right, because it could be you, if you win in November, or no, you win the primary. Let's just say you win first place, and you're definitely Green Party. You're not a Republican. You're not a Democrat. They put somebody in there that's a Democrat, but it's like, he really cost us. Oh wow, that could get really messy.
I will shout out, just because I think it's interesting for people to know, but Washington actually has had a non-Democrat and non-Republican lieutenant governor and governor. So you have to go pretty far back. But there was a candidate named John Rankin Rogers who was a member of the Populist Party, as well as Thurston Daniels, who was also a member of the Populist Party. And if I'm looking at the years, they probably served on the same ticket. So we had a governor and lieutenant governor for one term who were elected members of the Populist Party. And so, even though it is in many ways, I would be the first Green, I would be the first Vietnamese American elected to the position. I also just encourage people to recognize it's not crazy. We haven't always been governed by Democrats and Republicans, and there's no reason we couldn't elect somebody from a different party today.
That is absolutely. I'm still amazed at that because I guess because I've lived in Indiana the majority of my life, I'm used to, oh, well, they pick it in the primary, this who runs in the journal, and that's just the way it is. And oh, wow. I just, now I have the whole series of questions. I'm like, well, then what if this happens? What if that happens? I won't go into all those because I know your time is short. Um, I always ask this question. I do ask this question. I usually go through a series of issues, but I'm not going to because, again, you've pretty much covered everything that I would have thought. I do want to ask you this question. Um, when you, what part of campaigning for governor of a, I would say a large state because you're larger than we are, what is the most challenging aspect and what is the most rewarding aspect?
Well, Washington is fairly geographically spread out. We've got a mountain range between sort of the coast and eastern Washington. And then, it becomes politically diverse, right? So you get east of the mountains and it gets real red, real Trumpy, real fast. Um, so there is a political challenge both in just getting around the state so that people can see you and hear about you, and then crafting a platform and a message that truly can appeal to the entirety of the state. Now, I don't think that the sort of red part of the state represents a majority, and I don't think should be represented as a majority constituency. But that does not mean that as governor, I wouldn't represent, that entire part of the state, right? So it's important to me that the platform I put forward is something that I really do believe benefits everybody. It's not just like a urban agenda, right? It's not just a Seattle agenda. Uh, so I think that dealing with that, the way that it's spread out and then has these big geographic or sorry, political divides um, is challenging. But part of what is rewarding about that is I do think that it represents a kind of good microcosm for the United States. So in that similar kind of urban rural divide in a sort of like um, yeah, I think that in that sense, it has given me a good ability to think a little bit more comprehensively rather than getting stuck in just a more of a liberal bubble. And the other thing I would say the most rewarding part, more than that, is that I think that Washington has a fiercely independent sort of mindset to it. It is a very compassionate state. It is a progressive state in its heart and soul that is in a constant battle with neoliberalism. And so that's why, as Washington goes, I feel that so does so much of the nation. Um, but I think that feeling that you are on the cutting edge of it is incredibly exhilarating. And so I feel that there's a huge amount of openness to very, very new ideas, very, very ideas that in many parts of the country would just be immediately thrown out as crazy, not practical. Here in Washington, we go, okay, let's think about that. Maybe we can make that work. And it starts just at that grassroots level where the people have that open mind and they're very, very smart and they start, they're very solutions minded. And then it moves its way up to the government where you kind of have to like fight a lot of that skepticism. But the reality is I wouldn't be doing any of this if I didn't think that the right ideas can win here. And so um, even though it's an uphill battle and I have to hear horrible excuses from our legislators all the time, and I have to deal with the fact that they killed free school lunches and homegrown cannabis, kind of no-brainer policies, and I have to call them out for that. Uh, at the same time, I do believe that we can have everything on my platform. I think that even even from that sort of citizen organizing model, I'm not elected governor, but I just build the movement and we can pass it through ballot initiative. And if we really get stuck on the legislature, we can always take it to ballot ourselves. And that is, I think, also incredibly healthy and very, very pro democracy to have that ballot initiative process. Um, but I think that every once in a while we are able to scare our legislators into giving us some real improvements. So in that sense, I think that we always I always appeal to our legislature to do the right thing and say, but if you're not ready for that, if that's just not where you are right now, well then we'll organize it ourselves on the street. We'll take it to the ballot and see how you feel then. And a lot of the times that's actually this there's a sort of symbiotic process there. When they see that public support, then you start to get the concessions. And so I think there is more of a healthy balance between sort of grassroots organizing and our government in Washington.
That must be great to live in a ballot initiative state. It has to be because I don't, and we would never do something like we. Our legislature. Well, I'm not even going to start because this will turn into a 3-hour show of how terrible the Indiana legislature is. 90% Republican, 10%. Yeah, but that's our state. Um, Lastly, I want to talk before I ask the last question. I do want everyone to remember. I just check my calendar really quickly. Destroy the duopoly, August the 29th, 6:30 p.m. on this YouTube channel. Tune in. I'm still looking for guests. I got 2 more to go, but we're going to have a fantastic discussion about how we can destroy this terrible, awful system that has left too many of us behind. And we can do it now and stop with the waiting till 4 more years. No, we have to do it now. So be on the lookout for that. It'll be live. We're going to have a great time discussing the issue, and it'll start at 6:30. So finally, Andre, if you could tell us how we can connect to your campaign and the best way to support your campaign.
Mm-hmm. So my website is publicstackhouse.org, and I truly encourage you all to check it out because it's not like a normal candidate's website. There are many more calls to action, clear calls to action, and there is much more detailed policy and a much better policy platform. So dive into it. I encourage you to really look into what I'm proposing, because it takes a minute for some of that to absorb how revolutionary some of this stuff actually is. But it truly has the ability to change our lives. And then you can sign up. You can sign up to volunteer. You can send in a donation. But if you happen to be in Washington, or know people in Washington, actually the number one thing you can do is if you go to publicstackhouse.org/pledge, you can sign the pledge to vote, which lets me know that you support me, that you're out there, you're planning to vote for me. And so that's the number one way that you can support the campaign, because it only takes 2 seconds. You can do it from a phone or a computer. And then the number two thing you can do is just share that pledge and say, well, I'm voting for this guy, and I think you should too. So, as I said before, just sort of that word of mouth and the knowledge, the name recognition is the thing that this campaign needs most of all. So share this stream, share my website on your Facebook or your Twitter or wherever you are on social media. Tell a friend, send it to your group chat, bring it up in the break room. And that's really what is going to get these ideas to grow, going to make the campaign grow, going to get me more votes, and going to make all of these things happen sooner. So that is my call to action for you.
I don't know what's wrong with me. I am so sorry.
I'll also throw a shout out to publicstackhouse.org/socials, I think. Is it socials? Yeah, socials. Because I'm on all of them, and some of them I've just gotten on, and don't have a huge following. Others I've been building up a following. But, I'm on X, I'm on Discord, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. And these are all communities that we can grow in, which helps strengthen our voices.
And if I can ever stop coughing, I want to thank you for coming on this show. I know we had a whole lot of scheduling things that happened, especially on my end, but I appreciate your time. I want to thank everyone for coming on tonight. Remember, you can still comment even after the live stream. Remember to like this podcast, share, 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 share. We're only 52 away from 300. I am still wanting to do my 300 subscriber show. Please, please, please. But most of all, August the 29th, 6:30 p.m. Destroy the duopoly. It's time. We can do it. Thank you for watching and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you. Support independent media, everyone.
Thank you.